Welcome to our YouTube channel, The Alien Tales, and please ensure that you have subscribed.
My alien girlfriend's family keeps trying to eat me. The wedding's next week. It's not personal, they say. Consuming the groom is tradition. I'm starting to think human-alien relationships need better prenups. The Vorthak family home looked like a Gothic cathedral had mated with a butcher shop. Crimson walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins, and the air tasted metallic. I clutched Nixera's scaled hand tighter as we approached the towering obsidian doors. "Remember, Tobias?" she whispered, her amber eyes flickering with nervous energy. "Don't make eye contact with Uncle Grex for more than 3 seconds. He'll interpret it as a challenge, right? No prolonged eye contact." I mentally added it to my growing list of survival tips. What about the thing where they bare their teeth? That's actually friendly. It's the tongue flicking you need to worry about. The doors groaned open, revealing Nixera's mother, the Thessarian Prime matriarch Vexthala. She stood 9 feet tall, her midnight blue skin covered in ceremonial scars that told the story of her conquests. For arms extended in what I desperately hoped was a welcoming gesture. "Little Nixera brings the soft meat." Her voice rumbled like distant thunder. How quaint. Nixera's father, Vorthak the Render, emerged from the shadows. His species males were traditionally smaller, only 7 feet tall, but his reputation for creative dismemberment preceded him. He sniffed the air around me with obvious interest. "He smells tender," Vorthak mused, circling me like a predator. "Well marbled. The stress hormones add a lovely bouquet." "Father, please," Nixera hissed in their guttural native tongue. "It's tradition, daughter. The groom must be tasted before the ceremony. How else do we know he's worthy?" I forced a smile, trying to ignore the way his mandibles clicked hungrily. This was going to be a long week. Dinner was an ordeal that tested every fiber of my being. The Vorthak family dining hall stretched like an aircraft hangar, its walls lined with the mounted heads of creatures from a dozen worlds. I sat at the table's foot, acutely aware that I was the only one not sporting razor-sharp teeth. Nixera's younger brother, Zethkar, kept making slashing motions across his throat whenever their parents weren't looking. He was only 50 years old, barely a teenager by their standards, but already stood 6 feet tall with developing venom sacs. "So, Tobias," Vexthala began, delicately tearing into what looked suspiciously like a roasted space monkey. "Nixera tells us you work in accounting? Financial analysis, actually. For the Colonial Trade Commission." The entire table fell silent. Uncle Grex, a scarred veteran with one missing eye, began laughing, a sound like grinding glass. "He counts numbers," Grex wheezed. "No wonder he's so soft. When I was his age, I'd already claimed 17 battle trophies." "Different cultures, Uncle," Nixera said diplomatically. "Humans value intellectual pursuits." Vorthak leaned forward, his red eyes gleaming. "But surely you've killed something? A rival? A prey animal? Even a small insect?" I thought about the spider I'd reluctantly squashed last month. "Well, there was this. A spider!" Zethkar shrieked with laughter. "He murdered a tiny spider and thinks himself a warrior." The family erupted in amused chittering. I caught Nixera's apologetic glance and tried to sink lower in my chair. Her cousin Velandra, a sleek huntress with cybernetic implants, studied me with predatory interest. "Perhaps," she purred, "we should test his flavor tolerance before the ceremony. Just a small bite." My fork clattered to the plate. The next morning, I woke to find 3 sets of glowing eyes staring down at me. Zethkar, Velandra, and their cousin Hrexanael stood around my guest bed like vultures around roadkill. "Morning snack time," Velandra announced cheerfully. I scrambled backward, sheets tangling around my legs. "Nixera, she's at her purification ritual," Hrexanael explained, flexing claws that could probably gut a rhino. "Won't be back for hours. We thought we'd get better acquainted." "This is completely normal," Zethkar added, producing a device that looked like a cross between a tuning fork and a surgical scalpel. "Just a tiny sample. You won't even miss the flesh." I bolted for the door, but Velandra was faster. She tackled me to the floor with casual ease, her cybernetic arm whirring as it adjusted grip strength. Really, you're being quite rude, she chided. We're trying to honor you with traditional pre-wedding rituals. Most grooms feel privileged. Most grooms probably aren't human. True, Hrexanael mused. The last groom was a crystalline entity from Proxima 7. Tasted like electric diamonds. Very crunchy. The door burst open. Nyxera stood in the threshold, her ceremonial robes smoking with righteous fury. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the windows rattle. Unhand my intended. The three younger Vorthaks immediately released me, shrinking back like scolded children. We were just... Zethkar began. I know what you were doing. She helped me to my feet, her touch surprisingly gentle despite her obvious rage. The sampling ritual isn't until the rehearsal dinner. You're 2 days early. I stared at her. There's an actual sampling ritual? Her silence was answer enough. The Vorthak wedding coordinator, Wyassandra, had the demeanor of a funeral director and the appetite of a starving shark. She spread blueprints across the obsidian table while I tried not to think about what the red stains might be. Now then, she began, her voice like silk over razors. Let's discuss the ceremonial consumption sequence. I looked desperately at Nyxera, who was studying the ceiling with suspicious intensity. The what now? Oh, it's quite simple really, Wyassandra continued, producing a detailed anatomical chart that was definitely human. We begin with the traditional ankle tasting during the vow exchange. Nothing fatal, of course. Just enough to establish genetic compatibility. My ankle throbbed sympathetically. Then, during the ring ceremony, the bride's family performs the ritual of sweet marrow. We make small incisions along the forearms. Very ceremonial, very dignified. And if I refuse? Wyasandra's laugh could have shattered crystal. Oh, darling, you can't refuse. It would be the gravest of insults. Wars have been fought over less. Nyxera finally spoke up. Perhaps we could modify the traditions? For cultural sensitivity? Absolutely not. Vexthala's voice boomed from the doorway. The matriarch entered with the unstoppable force of a freight train. For 1,000 years of Vorthak matrimonial law cannot be altered for one squeamish human. But mother, the consumption rites are sacred, daughter. They ensure the groom's life essence properly mingles with our bloodline. Without them, the marriage would be spiritually void. I raised a trembling hand. What if we just sign some papers instead? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Every Vorthak present turned to stare at me with expressions of pure horror. Papers? Wyassandra gasped, clutching her thorax dramatically. I'd apparently suggested something equivalent to defiling their gods. 3 a.m. I made my move. The Vorthak household slept during the deep night cycle, their bioluminescent patches dimming to a faint glow. I'd memorized the guard rotations and knew Uncle Grex would be passed out drunk on fermented Klikshan brain wine. My escape plan was simple. Reach the transport bay, steal a hovercycle, and make it to the human embassy before anyone noticed. Nyxera would understand. Eventually, maybe after therapy, I crept through corridors lined with ancestral hunting trophies, trying not to think about becoming the newest addition. The transport bay was just ahead when a low growl stopped me cold. Vorthak emerged from the shadows, still wearing his sleeping robes but looking fully alert. His red eyes gleamed with predatory amusement. Going somewhere, son-in-law? I was just getting some air. Ah, he nodded knowingly. Pre-wedding nerves. Perfectly natural. I remember before my first marriage, tried to flee to the neighboring system. My bride's father caught me 3 parsecs out. What happened? He ate my left pinky toe as punishment. But the marriage lasted 60 wonderful years until she died in the Great Insurrection. He examined his remaining digits nostalgically. Good times. I backed toward the bay doors. That's lovely. But I really should. The thing is, Tobias, Vorthak continued conversationally, running away would dishonor my daughter, and dishonoring my daughter would require me to hunt you across the galaxy and slowly devour you piece by piece over several weeks. Several weeks. I'm told I'm quite creative with seasoning. A new voice cut through the darkness. He's not going anywhere. Nyxera stepped into view, her expression unreadable. In her hand, She held a neural disruptor that could drop a charging rhino beast. Darling, I began weakly, we need to talk. Nixera's private chambers overlooked the city's sprawling neon-lit expanse. Bioluminescent spires twisted toward the purple sky while transport pods zipped between towering structures like fireflies. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't contemplating my imminent consumption. You were really going to run, she said quietly, not turning from the window. Your family wants to eat me, Nix. Literally. There's a menu. She finally faced me, and I was surprised to see tears. Actual tears. Not the acidic discharge I'd expected, streaming down her scaled cheeks. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think any of this is easy for me? I sat beside her on the biofoam cushions. Then why go through with it? Because I love you, you impossible human. Her claws traced patterns on my arm. Gently, not the flesh-rending variety. But I also love my family, and my culture. And finding a balance between those loves is tearing me apart. There has to be another way. I've spent months researching alternatives. I've consulted xenobiologists, cultural anthropologists, even hired a human lawyer. The consumption rights are integral to Vorthak matrimonial law. Without them, our marriage wouldn't be recognized. What about human law? Irrelevant. We're in Vorthak space on a Vorthak world. Their rules apply. I pulled her closer, marveling at how her alien features had become so dear to me. What if we eloped, found some neutral planet with relaxed marriage laws, and spend our lives as exiles, never seeing our families again? She shook her head. I won't ask you to make that sacrifice, but you'll ask me to become an appetizer? Despite everything, she laughed. A sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The consumption isn't meant to be fatal, you know. Theoretically, well, humans are more fragile than most species. Great. I was about to become a cautionary tale. I'd never imagined my bachelor party would involve being marinated. Yet here I sat in a specialized biotank while Uncle Grex explained the finer points of flavor enhancement. The secret, he said, adjusting the nutrient flow, is the pre-seasoning. Most families just go straight for the consumption, but the Vorthaks have always been gourmets. The other male relatives nodded sagely. Cousin Vex Thor, a military veteran with scars from the Centauri campaign, poured another round of their traditional bachelor party beverage, something that tasted like liquid fire mixed with regret. In my day, Grex continued, we'd hunt the groom first. Real sporting chance. These modern arranged tastings lack artistry. The human couldn't hunt, Zethkar pointed out. He'd probably trip over his own feet and accidentally impale himself. True. Very clumsy species. All that soft flesh and no protective carapace. Hrexanael poked my shoulder experimentally. It's like nature wanted them to be eaten. Vorthak raised his glass. To Tobias. May his sacrifice honor our bloodline, and may his screaming be melodious. To Tobias, the group chorused. I managed a weak smile. Thanks, guys. Really feeling the love here. Oh, we do love you, Grex assured me earnestly. That's why we're going to savor every bite. Proper appreciation, you understand. Absolutely. Nothing worse than rushed consumption. Vexthor agreed. Disrespectful to the meat. I was beginning to understand why most humans avoided interspecies dating. The cultural barriers were significant. A young cousin I hadn't met before peered into the tank. Will he taste like chicken? More like pork, I'd imagine, Vorthak mused. Humans are omnivores, like Rigelian swine. I'm right here, you know, I said weakly. Of course. We wouldn't dream of discussing your flavor profile behind your back. Very rude. 24 hours before the wedding, I sat across from Vexthala in her private study, surrounded by legal texts that predated human civilization. She'd agreed to hear my proposal for cultural accommodation, though her expression suggested she considered it a waste of time. Matriarch Vexthala, I began formally. I come before you seeking wisdom. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of mild interest. Continue. I've studied your laws extensively. The consumption rights serve 3 purposes: establishing genetic compatibility, honoring the groom's sacrifice, and binding families through shared meal experience. Correct. And your point, I pulled out a data pad containing my research. What if we could achieve those same goals through alternative means? Impossible. The rites are sacred tradition, but traditions evolve. Your own grandmother, the legendary matriarch Cassandra, modified the ritual of dominance to accommodate crystalline entities. Vexthala's posture shifted. I'd done my homework, and mentioning her revered ancestor had clearly struck a chord. The circumstances were exceptional. The Proximan delegate couldn't survive traditional combat, and I can't survive traditional consumption. But I'm willing to honor the spirit of your laws through compromise. I activated the datapad's holo display, showing genetic compatibility charts I'd commissioned from the galaxy's leading xenobiologists. DNA analysis confirms Nixera and I are genetically compatible. The binding ritual could be achieved through symbolic consumption. Perhaps a few drops of blood mixed with wine. Her laugh shook the walls. You would deny us the joy of properly tasting our newest family member? I would offer you something better. A living son-in-law who can father your grandchildren and contribute to your clan's future. Dead. I'm just dinner. For the first time since I'd met her, Vexthala looked genuinely thoughtful. Interesting perspective, she admitted. But the family council will never agree. Then let me convince them. The great hall buzzed with anticipation as 37 members of the extended Vorthak clan assembled for the emergency session. I stood at the center of the circle, feeling like a defendant at a trial where the verdict was already decided. Vexthala called for order with a bone-rattling roar. The human seeks to address traditional law. We will hear his words before rendering judgment. I took a deep breath, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Honorable council members, I stand before you not as an outsider seeking to diminish your traditions, but as someone who hopes to join your family through marriage. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some approving, others distinctly hostile. Your consumption rights have served the Vorthak people for millennia. They represent values I respect. Courage, sacrifice, and family unity. But I propose that true strength lies not in blind adherence to tradition, but in the wisdom to adapt when necessary. Uncle Grex snorted. Pretty words from prey meat. I am not prey, I replied firmly. I am your daughter's chosen mate. And if you consume me, you rob yourselves of something far more valuable than a single meal. I gestured to the walls lined with battle trophies and conquest banners. Your people are warriors, conquerors, survivors. But what happens when there are no more worlds to conquer? What happens when the galaxy knows your strength so well that victory becomes meaningless? The hall fell silent. You need allies, partners, family members who can navigate the new galaxy. One built on trade, diplomacy, and cooperation rather than pure dominance. Matriarch Kesthera, Vexthala's ancient mother, rose slowly from her ceremonial throne. At over 300 years old, she commanded absolute respect. The soft meat speaks wisdom, she wheezed. Perhaps it is time for new traditions. The council erupted in shocked chittering. The ceremony took place at sunset, when Vorthak's binary stars painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold. I stood at the altar wearing traditional groom's armor, mostly ceremonial, but it made me feel slightly less edible. Nixera approached through the assembled crowd, magnificent in her ancestral wedding wrappings. The bioluminescent patterns on her scales pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, creating a living light show that took my breath away. The matriarch performed the binding ritual with ancient words that predated human civilization. When she reached the traditional consumption verse, she paused and smiled, a terrifying sight involving far too many teeth. By unanimous council decision, she announced, we modify the sacred rites for this union. Let the symbolic tasting commence. I rolled up my sleeve expecting the ritual knife. Instead, Nixera produced a small vial of synthetic human blood, medically safe and culturally acceptable. Clever girl, Vexthala murmured approvingly. The family passed the vial, each taking a ceremonial sip while offering blessings for our union. When it returned to me, I drank the remaining drops, officially completing the consumption cycle. By blood shared and vows spoken, the matriarch declared, I pronounce you bound in eternal union. The celebration lasted 3 days. I survived all of it, though not without several close calls involving overenthusiastic relatives and insufficient quantities of alcohol. As we departed for our honeymoon on the neutral resort world of Paradiso Prime, Nixera squeezed my hand. "So," she said with a grin that showed just a hint of fong, "how do you feel about meeting my mother's family next month?" I considered the question seriously. Will they try to eat me? Well, they're vegetarians, thank the stars. But they do have this tradition involving ritualistic composting of the groom. I decided some family traditions might have to wait. The end.